we're going to move now on to our next panel, which is about location meeting power, how grid access and renewable drive data center side decisions. And to that, we would like to welcome the panelists tackling this question. Luca Mezossy-Dona, co-founder and CGO at IONATE, Patrick Giangrosso, commercial leader at LiteON, and Íngrid Munné Collado, forecasting lead at Electricity Maps. And moderating this debate, we welcome Edouard Bulteau, operating partner at Marble. Join me, please, on stage. Welcome. Thank you so much for contributing on the conversation. And you have the floor for yourself.
Thank you. Is it working? Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us while we're getting closer to lunch. We'll try to keep this one fun and interactive. We'll talk about location meets power. So if you see what happened the last few years, I mean, deploying data center, building data center, it can take a couple of years. But then getting to the grid connection is a real struggle. We are at like 5 years in the US, sometimes in Europe, in the major hubs, it can take 7 to 10 years. Recently, Google was saying that some utilities in the US were asking for like more than 12 years to be able to develop some connection. So it seems that the access to the grid definitely became one of the biggest bottleneck, if not the biggest bottleneck. And so in that context, of course, we can wonder how this power constraint has an impact on the siting. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. But we'll discuss that together, and we'll also try to talk about what are the solutions. We'll also keep a little bit of time for you, if you want to ask questions, if you want to add comments, disagreement with us. So think about it, and we'll have some mic at the end if you want to jump in. Before doing that, I'm happy to have on stage Luca, Íngrid, and Patrick, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
You want to start?
Nope. Patrick Giangrosso with LiteON. They're a direct current data center commercial leader.
I'm Íngrid. I'm the forecasting lead at Electricity Maps.
And I'm Luca. I'm co-founder and chief growth officer at IONATE.
Can you explain a little bit what all of your companies are doing, so that everybody's aware?
Yeah. Electricity Maps is a startup, and it was mostly focusing on carbon accounting. But through the 10 years that it has lasted, now we're mostly operating on how forecasting can actually help shift and unlock flexibility, both from electric vehicles, data centers, in order to reduce CO2 emissions, but also costs of running those massive data centers and cloud jobs.
We are building the hardware-software backbone for smart power stacks, and our mission was to resolve or help resolve the infrastructure challenge of the energy transition. And for that, we've innovated upon the fundamental building blocks of power systems, transformers, turning them into all-in-one smart devices, giving them solid-state capabilities in a way that is commercially ready, market-ready today. But once we have a network of them, we essentially enable intelligent nodes, and orchestrating them with our AI-enabled software also allows us to unlock inherently resilient, efficient, smart platforms, should that be in the grid or should that be in data center microgrids.
So LiteON is one of the bigger providers of AC/DC power supplies at the rack level. And so we're very good at power electronics, and we looked at how do we take that and move it into the data center space, the infrastructure. So we, about a year and a half ago, came up with the idea of creating a business around direct current data center infrastructure. And what we found was it enables a lot of things, but if you go direct current, and they just talked on the stage briefly about direct current kind of coming in a couple of years, we're actually implementing it now because we see there's benefits, but it allows for multiple energy inputs. So you could have multiple paths for energy to directly come in. You could interact with the grid with that, and then you can also supply DC direct to the servers, which servers are all native DC solutions, right? So it creates a lot of efficiencies in the deployment. And what it does is also enables you to then put these edge data centers anywhere you really want to put them using the same design. So just enabling easy delivery as well as connection to the grid.
Cool, thank you, Patrick. And so we'll talk a little bit how some of these solutions can actually help solve our problem with this access to power. So we talked about the bottleneck of the grid access. I'll be curious to understand through the work you're doing, and you see you're working kind of around that value chain of data center and access to power. How have you seen that bottleneck evolving over time? How is that, has it manifested in potentially what you see from also your customer? Can you give some examples or explain that a little bit? Maybe Patrick?
Yeah, I was part of a team developing data centers over the past 4 years. And what we saw was 4 years ago, trying to find a site that was 50 megawatts, 60 megawatts, and getting a connectivity, you could get it in a year with the right agreements. You had to do EIA process, EIA certification and so forth. But now with these 100 megawatt data centers plus, between the utilities and the community saying we don't want these anymore, that process now can take 4 years, 5 years. Not only that, the utilities are asking for millions of dollars up front just to even start the process. Before, you kind of paid once you got that connection. Now they're saying, you need to pay me $40 million, what it's going to cost at the end to do this, but you got to pay it now. So you're seeing utilities kind of starting to push back a lot. They don't have the power reserves, so now what you're seeing is, at least in the United States, there's a lot of talk about bring your own power. If you want to build a data center, you have to bring your own power, which means a lot of people are turning to gas turbines and doing on-site generation, which I've actually been an advocate for years, but the way they're doing it is just not the right way to do it. So the evolution, just like we've gone from nobody wants to do liquid cooling 2 years ago to liquid cooling is the greatest thing since sliced bread. In 2 years, now you're going to, I'm never doing on-site generation, to, got to do it. Yeah. So the evolution of how to develop a data center has just changed incredibly over the last 2 years.
Yeah. Anyone want to add on that?
I mean, just to think about what this looks like in practice, when we're connecting a data center to the grid, it has to work for both sides. The data center has to receive enough and good quality power, but equally, the grid needs assurances that the data center isn't going to introduce any instability and is going to be effectively a good energy citizen for the grid. And we're seeing the grid hit its constraints in many places. It's not just due to data centers, it's partially due to the energy transition, but things are getting very, very complex, very dynamic, and hence the grid is upping kind of the limits of what they're looking for from anybody that connects into their system. Should that be a power generation source, or should that be a data center, a big load? So I think the general trend is that things are getting stricter, and it's more difficult and requires a lot more thought about how we design power systems at the core of it.
Yeah, and so in general, and not just related to basically data center. Interesting. I think also so in the title of the session, we also mentioned renewables. I think it's interesting maybe to understand how also the situation has evolved in regards to renewable. Like, at what extent historically renewables was driving that decision about where to put data center, and how maybe that has shifted because of these new constraints over time. Ingrid, do you want to say?
Yeah, I think since I've been at Electricity Maps for 3 years roughly, and when I joined, I remember that most of the conversations were, where do we want to shift our cloud compute to use those data centers that had a larger share of renewables, and not so much about the costs of running those data centers. But now I think it has shifted a bit back and forth, but I think we're reaching a point where with the need of more compute power that you need based on AI mostly, it requires that you need to be faster at providing this electricity that we need in the data centers. And therefore, you start being a bit innovative and say, okay, should I spin up a gas power plant to actually cover that demand? So you can see that the shift from trying to build that data center and run it in the most sustainable way has somehow been a bit like hidden in the last months. But I must say that now with the crisis in the Middle East, we're a bit going back to, okay, we can rely on gas again, because there's like, then we're not energy independent, then how can we actually run these data centers back on renewables, and then maybe be smarter with, should we use PPAs, should we start operating this data center in a different way, and not so much as a load, but as an active participant in the grid, so that we can cover some of the costs of operating that data center.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, maybe with some work you've done around data center in the past, have you seen also that shift of people trying to really having directly access historically, in particular for sustainability reason, access to these renewables, and maybe a different, like a shift of interest these days?
Yeah, and I mentioned that I was part of a team developing data centers a couple of years for a while, and our whole mantra was sustainable data centers, and we were trying to partner with renewable energy providers to place our data centers close to those renewable energy sources and have 100% renewable energy as part of our portfolio. And that was always the talk, and sustainability, and there was always the levels of sustainability to talk to then. That's gone out the window at this point, because more driven by the need for the speed to market versus anything else. Mm-hmm. But to your point, I think it is coming back. It will come back. Yeah. And one of the benefits, been a little self-promotional, of direct current doing DC data centers is a lot of those renewables are DC native. Wind, solar, and fuel cells. If you run a fuel cell on a renewable energy or cleaner energy, then that's a native DC source that you can connect direct to the DC, and it becomes a lot more simpler to then connect to the data center. And you can do direct current from the renewable straight to the load.
So it seems that actually that interest for renewable is coming back. It's coming back also because of that constraint, because it can be seen as a way to help get rid of that grid bottleneck. And so maybe that's a good segue towards like thinking about what are the different solutions to get over that bottleneck. What have you seen? What have you been working on also to try to help have easier access in a different way by different design to power? Whoever wants to start.
Maybe just to tag on the last thought and to segue into this new topic is the way to think about it is there is a hierarchy of needs that has shifted for data centers. But renewables have been a beacon of sustainability. Now they're a way for energy independence or resilience when you need to diversify your power sources. They can be a way of bring your own power, and that comes back to the design of the data center. And what we see as a general trend, there is a lot more thought behind designing data centers that can be entirely independent of the grid, or at least interacting with the grid in such a way where they can sustain themselves for a certain amount of time, but in exchange, the grid requires them to also be there to support in times of need. So I think that is sort of a general theme. And then there are creative ways to design these facilities, depending on the size as well, because there is going to be a huge difference between a facility that's a couple hundred megawatts versus, let's say, what we were talking about. Edge is now a whole different thing. It's now, let's say, 30 megawatts, but that used to be the standard size for data centers in the past. And it's much easier to build your own microgrid and have your local on-site renewables generation when you're building a smaller one, with rolling out some of the AI factories in the US and also in Europe. The plan is to have hundreds of megawatts, and that's why speed to power is so important, and gas peaker plants or gas access comes into play. One way to design for that is the direct current. the OCP has, the Open Compute Project, put out a paper about how we can have these different designs come together. There's a lot of talk about hybrid designs where we've got some part of the facility AC, some part of it DC, and then looking at how we can build modular data centers as well. We can start smaller, few tens of megawatts, but how we can build those building blocks up is a really interesting thing, and I think it's really reshaping how we think about not just data centers per se, but microgrid power systems in general.
I think,
Yeah, so
well, sorry, I was going to say,
go ahead.
following that, when you talk about the different design, it's not only just the design of the data center itself, but it's the, and kind of tagging on to the conversation earlier before us, was the design of the internet, or the design of how you deliver data centers, right? Maybe you're no longer doing 100 megawatt, 30 megawatt data centers, but you're doing 31 megawatt data centers, and they're a lot easier to place, right? So you can place those at existing co-location facilities. You can place those at cell tower sites. You can place a 1 megawatt modular data center at a hospital or at a manufacturing facility. And finding that 1 megawatt at a hospital is a lot easier than finding 30 megawatts somewhere close by, right?
But maybe a bit of a controversial opinion, but as we're talking a lot about speed to deployment, do you think actually working on these smaller data center that maybe are easier because, again, we don't have that bottleneck, we have access to power more easily, because we are working on smaller project, is it still a way to get to scale and help deploy the capacity we are actually looking for?
I think it's even fast. It can be faster, actually, because even if you want to bring your own power and do gas turbines, right now gas turbines are 2 to 3 years out anyway. So you still can't start for 3 more years.
Yeah.
Whereas you can do a modular data center, a smaller data center, and deploy it in 6 months. And if you do it right without backup generation, you don't have to do EIA assessments. So therefore, I don't have to do the environmental assessment. I've just sped that up by a year.
Do you have examples of projects like on that vein? I mean, we've been talking about microgrid, on-site generation, like project you've been working on that hand?
Yeah, so we're doing 2 POCs, right, proof of concepts right now, one in Singapore that's using fuel cells. So Singapore's got a huge energy constraint. They've had that for the last 5 years now. And so if you want to build in Singapore, you have to bring your own power, basically. And so they're doing it with fuel cells, and we're doing a project where we're taking a fuel cell coming off of their DC bus and deploying that. And that allows this organization to start deploying a data center in Singapore proper that you can't really do right now. Right? So that's one POC. The other one is we are doing a project in the States where we're direct connecting to a solar and deploying that way. And that project is actually where we're going to work with the utility and be able to send energy back to the utility during a demand response time. So it allows you then to be a good corporate citizen or a good citizen to the grid versus, I'll call it a suck on the grid, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we can add to the grid while still maintaining the load. So those are 2 that we're developing today, and then we've got one that we're working on in the UK that's going to be interesting as well.
Cool. I mean, you started to talk about demand response, and maybe here's a good segue for you, Ingrid, because Electricity Map has been working with a lot of customers working on flexibility, not necessarily related to data center historically, but so how have you seen also the space evolving, and how flexibility maybe became an important question for data center players?
I think if we look at the electric, that's where we started. We started with shifting the EV charging process. And in the beginning, it was we want to run some co-optimization. So we want to optimize the scheduling process based on carbon intensity to minimize carbon emissions if you charge your electric vehicle in Copenhagen, for example. But you could also maximize it at the time of the day where the solar power production is at the highest or the wind power production is at the highest. And at some point, with the price volatility, that became not the only constraint. Then we had to add, okay, we want to also minimize the cost of this charging process. And that's a scenario that can easily be translated to data centers as well. If you're not only relying on PPAs and you need to get that electricity from the grid, how can you actually optimize those? Like both the emissions that your data center is emitting and also the price you're going to pay at the end of the month. And that comes also as a result of this time to deployment that we see in data centers. So now you have this constraint of, I have these data centers around the world. That's a use case we implemented with Google, where you can actually change which data center you use. So you activate this like location-based flexibility, where you as a user can you as Google can incentivize users to choose a different data center, not Europe West 1, but maybe Europe North 2, which is located in Copenhagen. That would actually allow you to reduce the number of CO2 emissions that you're emitting, and at the end of the day, what is the cost the cost that you're saving. So that's on location-based, but then you can actually say, do I have any flexibility on where I run my cloud jobs? Because if I choose a data center in Portugal and I run the same cloud job at 7 a.m. in the morning, and I wait until 1 p.m., the CO2 emissions that this process, by just waiting this amount of hours, can be 3 times the amount of CO2 emissions, and also the price. So there's a whole new innovation that has been unlocked by the scenario that we're facing now with uncertainty, price volatility, and increasing pressure on the grid.
Do you see, I actually don't know if it's the case, but like, do you see also demand from these data center players to potentially leverage flexibility in other places on the grid? So not necessarily the flexibility of their own assets, but ready to pay for flexibility of other assets on the grid to help them actually get access to more power. Is it something you see appearing?
I haven't seen it right now, but I see it as a potential case. Okay. Like we can see that from the TSO perspective, when there's a high load on the grid and there's like peak loads, and you need to actually ask your users. I think we've seen on the news sometimes in the US when there's a heat wave and the network is under extreme pressure, that they send a message to their to their consumers, turn off the AC right now, so that they don't so that they reduce the grid constraint. I could see a world where there's some kind of reward process from the data center to those users. Yeah, exactly. by a virtual power plant, something like that. So like in the end, it's another flexibility case, right?
We see that in the US where they'll incentivize you, but still sometimes that incentivization is not high enough for them to participate in, right?
Yeah, and that's
but we talked about it earlier. Opposite to that is when you have too much power on the grid. In Spain, for instance, when they had too much solar, you could actually have the data centers turn on even more to absorb that energy and to be the load sink to absorb that energy, to hopefully try to prevent those incidents from happening again.
Yeah, because that requires some orchestration of the network itself. And we see this case in Spain with solar curtailment, but you also see that in the UK, in Scotland, where the wind assets that are installed there, they can produce up to 10 gigawatts, but the transmission lines can only cover to 7 gigawatts. Then you're curtailing electricity to actually ramp up something else, whereas maybe that electricity can be used to power and then in the end benefit the user.
So can we say actually that data center at some point can actually become an asset for the grid, or it's too much of a stretch and it's still more of a constraint than an asset? Do you see ways to actually really potentially leverage them to provide more services to the grid?
Of course. I think that is an idea on many people's minds. We're just very early in the process, and we need to think about the incentives or the mandates that will require them, because data centers are in a rush to greater capacities, have more power. I think that their priority right now is not thinking about the grid, but thinking about themselves. If we get to a world where the grid says, well, this is what we need from you in order to be able to connect, then that's a whole different story. But really, if we expect data centers to be part of the interconnected network, then there will have to be some kind of a symbiosis between them.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, I remember when I did my PhD, there was this panic, the grid can't take electric vehicles if the entire Europe switched from diesel cars to electric vehicles. Okay, the adoption of EVs is just increasing, and no one is talking about the grid not being able to to cope with that. But now we're panicking about data centers not being able to destroy the power systems. And in the end, that just requires that the grid has never been managed in the way that it has to be managed right now. Like before, the grid was just like a passive thing where we had big generation plants and big consumptions. And now we're reaching a point where everybody can be a consumer and a producer. That changes the way that we need to operate these systems. And right now, data centers are just considered massive loads, that they have only one job, and that is to consume electricity. But that doesn't have to be the case. You can have grid requirements where you actually say, look, you have to be able to be a backup if the TSO needs that, and you have to be, I can be able to curtail you if I need to, like you do with wind assets. So I think we need to just like work towards that.
Yeah, and maybe another way where the grid could actually benefit from what's happening on the data center side is, and we're talking about that just before, is, it's been years that the grid has been needed hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars and euros of investment to upgrade as it's getting older in a lot of geographies. And so maybe it's actually, with what's happening, it's actually a way to get more investment to the grid to potentially force also the data center player to participate to bring that these resources to upgrade the grid and develop more the grid. We have less than 5 minutes remaining, so I wanted to see if there were any questions in the room or things people wanted to share, or yes, there is. Can we have a mic in the back, please? It's coming.
She has a question as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for the panel. I'm Anna from Mitiga Solutions, a climate tech company. So my question is related to, taking the comment of Íngrid about how heat waves can impact the TSO in the US, or from other panels as well, the impact of hail on PVs and so on. So my question is, do you think that climate data is going to be, a data stream that is going to be needed in this consideration for location planning as well?
Can you repeat?
Yeah, if you think climate data is going to be one of the data streams that are going to be needed while considering location planning.
I think so.
It's already used today. I mean, you use it today because you want to locate data center in cooler locations, right? So that's why the Nordics are very big right now, is because you want to be in the Nordics because it's cooler, so it takes less energy to cool the data center, to cool the hardware. You also look at it from a perspective of hurricanes or cyclones or whatever, and you're not going to, typically you would not put one where there's a lot of storms that can be dangerous, or flooding or whatever. So the climate data is already there, but I think the use of the climate data, it's usually only used at the beginning. Once you cite it, then you never use it again. But I think where you're going is the use of this data, and what you were talking about is use of this data on an ongoing basis so that you understand heat waves that are coming, and you can plan for that heat wave ahead of time. And with the right infrastructure, with smart infrastructure, you can then start planning for that coming. So if you're running on solar and you know that it's going to be cloudy for the next 3 days, you need to make sure your batteries are fully charged. And do I want to shift some of my load to another location that I don't have to worry about that? So you can start to use that data to plan, to your point, where you're going to do it. Not only the cost of electricity, but weather situations. If a bad storm's coming and you don't want to worry about the power going out, and you might lose your data center, you shift all the important stuff to somewhere else because a major storm's coming. So I think the use of the data stream, the climate data, on an ongoing basis can be very helpful in running a more efficient data center, a more energy efficient data center.
There's a pretty big data center being built in northern of Norway, in Narvik, and now they are actually considering that place because of the effects of climate change, and then they want a place that is going to be cold the entire time. But that is causing that then you need a new transmission line that connects the north of Norway to the south of Norway to power all all that data center that you're placing in that exact location, because that's the best location that you can run. So that's on one side, but I completely agree with, like, we worked on a very specific project with a data center provider where they asked us to forecast energy emergency alerts. And that means that can we tell them when there's going to be a heat wave so that they can start switching the load to other places to not put more strain on the grid. And those are the kinds of like innovation that you need to implement, not only where you place the data center, but how you operate it later on.
We can take quick last question. I saw there was one in the back.
There was a gentleman in the back here.
Maybe also your voice is strong enough.
Thanks for a fascinating conversation. You quickly touched upon the topic of smaller modular data centers that would be, potentially off the grid. Quick question to you: what's the available capacity that is not being used in our grid? Not in terms of power procurement, in terms of being able to draw from the network. Where everyone's talking about the rush and about how much time it takes to bring online new production assets. But it seems as though Europe is producing less. It seems as though gas prices are being so high, everyone's kind of, our industry is struggling. Is there an argument that there is a lot of available capacity that could be co-located on power producing sites or on industrial sites, which have the ability to draw from the network and hence don't require permitting, have granted land access, and tick a lot of those boxes that the industry seems to be dying for?
That's a big question. I mean, just really briefly, when we talk about availability of power, location is one axis where we're tracking, time is another. And there are very different times in very different locations where you've got that availability. So yes, there can totally be an argument that there is excess capacity, but if a data center wants to operate 24/7, 7 days a week, every single minute of the day, then they might not be okay with those power peaks at certain times. That's my brief answer, but it's a very legitimate question, and we do need to look at critically in pockets of the grid where there might be underutilization. And I really like the idea of looking at industrial units that might not be using all of the power, but also looking at pockets of the grid where we can be using excess capacity from generation that is only there for a certain type of load, for a certain type of the day.
I think the challenge, if you're looking for 60 megawatts of capacity in one location, you're not going to find it. But if you want to do distributed, as she was saying, then I can find 61 megawatt pockets that all day long, right? And I think that's where the power of what we're talking about comes in, is I can do 61 megawatt locations throughout a certain area, and I can easily place those at a healthcare facility, at a manufacturing facility, at cell towers, at co-location, at telco facilities that are practically empty these days because they went from, 100,000 10 square meters of copper location to now they're 90% empty, right? So you got a lot of location, a lot of power available they're not using. So I think that's the sort of design change that I was alluding to earlier, is not one big one, but multiple small ones, and orchestrating that.
And just one quick note is thinking about the efficiencies of our system. There's a lot of efficiency that we can unlock by reducing losses in the entire system, but also in the data centers themselves that we're connecting in existing facilities. If we look at how we can upgrade that infrastructure, we can unlock multiple percentage points of efficiencies, and across a fleet of those data centers, that's very significant. So you're right, it's in there, but we do need to think about power systems design when it comes to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We are out of time, but want to thank the three of you for all these insights, super useful, and thanks for listening to us and participating. Have a good day.
Thank you.